Hello, my name is Elijah Figueroa.
Hi, my name is Alvin Tumblin Jr.
And we are going to be looking at a religious freedoms case study using the case Santa Fe Independent School District v. Doe. To start this off, we're going to be looking at first the parties involved in this case and what their roles were.
The two parties and their roles in this case were Doe and Santa Fe Independent School District. For the first one, Doe, it represents a group of students and their mothers specifically identifying as Mormon and Catholic. With this, they are challenging the district's policy on public prayer, arguing that it violates the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. And for the second one, Santa Fe Independent School District, the school district implemented a policy allowing student-led prayers and at their football games. The district is appealing the ruling from the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals.
To better understand this case and its actual legal ramifications, we're just going to go over the timeline and exactly what occurred in this case. So the main topic being addressed is prayer at public school events. And so in the Texas School District, specifically at Santa Fe High School, it was common for a student to deliver a prayer over the loudspeaker before each football game. The student was usually the student council chaplain. Now, as this continued to occur, some of the students and their parents that would attend these events challenged whether or not this was lawful and responded by filing a lawsuit saying that this use of school time for religion was violating the Establishment Clause. In response, the school made a policy for students to vote on whether or not to have prayer at the games and who would give it, thinking that this would establish the fact that this was a private form of speech and was voluntary on the students' basis. So the main legal question here was, do student-led prayer at a public school event violate the Establishment Clause? And so the verdict that was come to was that yes, in fact, it did violate the Establishment Clause. The policy was seen as unconstitutional. The prayers that occurred at these school-sponsored events were using school equipment and using school time, and it gave the appearance of the school endorsing a religion. And so even if the school would say themselves that they were not endorsing a religion, any outside observer who would attend these games, seeing that a student was using the school time and school property to have a prayer before games, would understand this to be endorsed by the school itself. What deemed this unconstitutional was that it could lead students to feel pressured to participate, even if they did not feel comfortable to participate. And so fellow students in the area who maybe had not voted for the use of prayer before the game would feel forced to be respectful and acknowledge it, even if that was something they did not vote for. Which tied into the other reason this was unconstitutional was the voting itself. The voting itself favored the majority of religions and excluded the minority, simply thinking that since most of the students were comfortable with the prayer, that therefore they could use the prayer at the public event and it would not be deemed unconstitutional because most of the students, agreed. The significance of this verdict being unconstitutional was that it reinforced the separation of church and state in public schools. And it made it very clear that public schools must remain neutral toward religion, whether implicitly or explicitly.
The problem addressed in this case is the Establishment Clause. Basically, what the Establishment Clause is, it prohibits the government from establishing an official religion or unduly favoring one religion or over another, which is a cornerstone of the principle of separation of church and state. And some of the key concepts from this is no official religion, government neutrality, protection of conscience, and applications of all levels of the government. For the first one, no official religion, with this, it prevents the federal government from declaring and financially supporting a national religion. And for the second one, government neutrality. Basically what this is, the government must remain neutral in matters of faith. And for the third one, protection of conscience. With this, what this is saying, to protect individuals' freedom of conscience, ensuring no person is compelled by the government to support or participate in a religion they do not believe in. And for the last one, applications of all levels of the government. What this is saying, the Supreme Court has incorporated the Establishment Clause through the 14th Amendment.
So we already heard that the verdict on this case was that the policy was deemed unconstitutional. But our personal verdict is that although we don't condone what happened, we can't understand it. We are blessed enough to go to a private school where religion is something very professed, and there is a religion picked of the school. And so we do always appreciate the use of prayer in school activities. But in this case, we have to understand that we're not dealing with a private institution, rather a public and government-run one. And so in light of that, some of the reasons why this verdict was correct were as follows. First, rules reflect values. And so even if not explicitly stated, the school was making a statement just based on their rule. So based on the fact that they had a rule allowing prayer to happen, they were making a statement and allowing this to happen, and therefore endorsing the prayer itself. The other main was that majority should not dictate minority. Even though it was held to a vote, doing this ensured only that the majority would feel okay, but not that all the students would be satisfied. And because of this, one of the main problems they had was that some of the students felt coerced into being involved in the prayer, even if they were not personally okay with it. And the main point of all this, that really sums it all up, is understanding that having a captive audience does not constitute private speech. So even though the prayer before the game can be seen as private speech and just a prayer of personal preference, using school property, school time, and a captive audience who is already there for the game does not constitute private speech. And so to better understand this, we're going to look and compare the case we're looking at today, Santa Fe Independent School District versus Doe, with the case Kennedy versus Burlington School District. So just for a bit of context, the case of Kennedy versus Burlington School District involved Joseph Kennedy, who was a high school football coach in Burlington, Washington. And after each game, he would kneel about midfield and pray. As this continued, some of the other players would join him. And as this began to grow, the school district would notice and asked him to stop, fearing that his actions could be seen as school endorsement and therefore violate the Establishment Clause. Kennedy, however, refused, continuing to pray, and said that this was his right in free speech. The result of this was that the school district actually chose to fire him, which then he sued, saying that the school district had violated his First Amendment right of freedom of speech. The result of this was that the Supreme Court did in fact rule him as being in the right, and that they had in fact violated his First Amendment right. Now, the main difference of this is understanding the difference between the public setting of Santa Fe versus Doe and the private case of Kennedy versus Burlington. So in Santa Fe versus Doe, those who were present were being coerced because this was not something of their choice to participate in, but rather something that was happening collectively at the game. And because of this, it was also, in light of that, it was a school-endorsed prayer. It was part of the decision of the school to even have that prayer in place, making it, in fact, a public setting and not a private one, therefore not protected by the First Amendment right. In the case of Kennedy versus Burlington, the coach did not pressure anyone to join him. He was simply expressing his own religious freedoms by himself at the games. And the prayers were a private religious expression, not part of his official coaching duties. Therefore, they could not be taken as a public matter and endorsed by the school, but rather they were in fact protected by his First Amendment rights. So in conclusion of looking at this case and comparing it with another one, we can see that public schools cannot endorse explicitly or implicitly any religion under the Establishment Clause of the United States Constitution. They must remain neutral, and they must endorse the separation of church and state. And although private speech is protected under the First Amendment, public speech at a public institution owned by the government is not. So understanding the setting is very important. And once again, in conclusion, the U.S. Constitution must continue to separate church and state and not mix the two, whether intentionally or unintentionally by their actions. Thank you very much.